With our habitats, we're trying to look at it from what will a kid see? What somebody that can walk or even in a stroller, like what is it that they can see and what opportunities and surprises can we have for them
Hmm.
that they can see from their angle rather than just an adult? So it's not a kid zoo per
Yeah.
se, but certainly a kid perspective. We're going to have different playgrounds kind of as you move around because a kid can only look at so many animals before they need to go run around
Get the
and
sillies
and
out.
yeah, get the sillies out.
Hi, my name is Jessica McCoy, and I'm your host here at Raising Midland, a podcast for parents in the Permian. Today I have Jeff Beard with, I know a lot of people are going to ask questions, Zoo Midland. He is the president of Zoo Midland, and we're going to talk about what are the plans for Midland's newest attraction for families. Join me as I introduce my friend, Jeff Beard. Hey, Jeff.
How's it going?
How's it going? I'm so excited to have you. I have so many questions.
Okay. Well, I'll try to answer as many of them as I can.
Well, we got to get to know each other a little bit over the past couple, I don't know, weeks. I think I contacted you about 3 or 4 weeks ago. But you're a native Midlander. So tell me, what's your story here in the Permian? How does it start off?
Yeah, so my family, I was born in Houston,
Okay.
and then my family moved out here when I was about 2.
Oh, wow.
So early 80s.
Hmm.
My dad was a chemical engineer, and he decided he wanted to go out on his own. And he decided that he grew up in Odessa, as did my mom. And so they decided they wanted to be in Midland to raise. I had 2 brothers, so 3 boys. They wanted to raise their 3 boys out in Midland.
Wow.
And so we moved out here in the early 80s, and I went to Midland High and then went to college for 4 years in Abilene at McMurray. And then when I graduated, I came right back and went to work for Crown Quest. So
Wow.
my wife and I moved back in, let's see, what would that have been? 2003.
Wow. So you've
And
been here
so,
for quite some time, huh?
yeah, yeah.
That's cool. So at Midland High School, what was your favorite part about growing up here? I love going to the Midland High events that take place almost, it seems like every day because
Yeah.
of all the pep rallies that they have. So what was your favorite part about growing up here?
So I was a baseball player.
Nice.
Played baseball at Midland High, and then played at McMurray. So, I think my life kind of travel baseball and all that kind of started when I was about 16 or 15, 16, and I was on one of the first travel teams. So really my sports was a lot of my memory from back then, but also I grew up kind of out in the country. So,
Nice.
roaming around out in the middle of mesquite patches and finding horny toads and lizards and that type of thing
Yeah.
was, if I wasn't doing baseball in school, I was doing something like that. So I liked Midland. Obviously I didn't know anything else at that age, but you could kind of do what you needed to do in Midland, which is, I'd say, still the way it is today. And
Hmm.
one of the things that is great about the community is that people decide that they want to do something and then they just go out and do it.
The entrepreneurial spirit here is very strong, that's for sure,
It
especially
is.
working for a company like Crown Quest, which has deep West Texas roots. I bet that's been fun. How long have you been there for?
Yeah, so 2003 is when I started there. So that's, what is that, 21 years that I've been with that group. And our president is a 4th generation Midlander at Crown Quest. Our CEO, he grew up in Big Spring and then came out to Midland when he was a young adult. So certainly have a community of Midlanders that I do life with every day.
I love that. And don't y'all have a couple ex student athletes on y'all's staff? I know Wally Dunn used to play basketball at Texas
He
Tech. Is that
did.
correct?
Yeah, people, I wouldn't say it was on purpose, but it wasn't on accident either. That we ended up with a lot of athletes.
Birds of a feather flock
Yeah,
together.
well, so I was in the land department and in charge of land. And so land is one of those things that's pretty competitive. And so if you can bring somebody in, we hired a lot of engineers, land, different disciplines out of college, and trained them. And athletes or military were
Mm.
kind of the 2 types of people that they know what competition looks like. They want to go out, they want to work hard. They put in extra work because you have to put in extra work to do those things. You're not just a college student; you're also an athlete, and the military obviously is you're putting in a lot of work to be good.
Hmm.
And so that's like again, it wasn't on purpose, but we definitely liked those and kids that grew up in small communities. Kids, college age,
Yeah.
they grew up in a small community because um, you learn to work and knowing how to work, especially in today's world, is important and
I
something
agree.
that's lost a
So
little bit.
let's go off of that comment that you just said. Growing up in a small community, you learn to work. I'm taking that to mean is you have to wear many hats, which also parlays into what you're saying. As a student athlete, I know personally that you're wearing a million hats. Not only do you have to do your schoolwork, but you also have to manage practice. You also have to manage your nutrition. With military, it's the same thing. You're doing about a million things at once.
That's right.
So to kind of segue, it kind of sounds like that's what you do in your everyday life, not only at work doing land, you're inland, right?
Yep,
Still at
that's right.
Crown Quest, but you're also the zoo president.
Yeah,
That is the definition of a Renaissance man. So tell me, how
yeah.
did you even, I mean, I can imagine having a family of your own, managing this, pretty large position at an incredible company, but also being able to take a huge role within our volunteering community as zoo president. Can you explain what that's like and how do you balance it all?
Uh, you
Or
know,
do you?
I don't, I honestly couldn't say how I found myself
Mhm.
where I am, other than I like to put my head down and work, and uh, seeing different opportunities and having an appreciation for this community that I grew up in that helped raise me. Wanting to be able to do something that is potentially bigger than yourself and having people around me. It's not certainly not just me. I couldn't do this without my partners.
Yeah.
um, having them have the same spirit and ideas on, hey, what if we did this? What if we did that? And then, you know, I like to build things, and so that can be physically building, doing an addition, doing laying tile. I mean, I've done all of those things up to building an organization, or being a part of an organization that is may need some help. I mean, I'm certainly not an expert at any of those things, but I'm willing to do the hard work. And I think that's what a lot of Midlanders or West Texans, for that matter, are that way. Going back to the small community, I mean, yeah, you may have a small farm and you feed the horses, and then you go do spreadsheets. Like, I mean,
Hmm.
you've got to know how to do a bunch of different things because in those small communities, you just decide, there's nobody here to help me, so I'm just going to figure out and I'm going to do it myself. And then if you
100%.
can get other people around you that are that same way, you can have a community like Midland where it's like, we're just going to go do this.
I can imagine. So, what inspired you to get involved with Zoo Midland? Like, how did the conversations begin about how to create a zoo in West Texas? Because it's my understanding we had something similar, like pretty long time ago, or it was like a maybe an animal sanctuary.
Well, there was Cole Park Zoo,
Okay.
which, similar in that there was animals.
Hmm.
It's not I mean, this was an older
Yeah.
style, much more, ours will be a much different style than that original zoo. And so, how did it start? 2018 is kind of when the original idea was discussed, and the Crown Quest, some of us at Crown Quest were talking about, what can we do for the community, that would be impactful? What does that look like? How do we do that rather than just giving dollars to something, which we've done that, but what are some other things that we can do that are tangible? And a zoo was brought up at that point. And it was a little bit of a scary proposition because one, none of us had ever done a zoo.
I'm sure that seems really intimidating
It
because then you're
was.
thinking about not only are you doing something that I'm sure is a family guy yourself, you want something that your kids are going to enjoy and your
Right.
family members are going to enjoy, but also to pick anything, I feel like the hardest thing to do anywhere would to be to create a zoo because there's animals. You have to think about the staff. It's a highly specialized staff.
Right.
So I feel like that's pretty admirable. I mean, that's pretty brave of your team to say, you know what, what's something unique that we can do? And something I wanted to give you props for was the fact that you guys came together and said, we're going to do something other than just donate money. I think that there's a place to that, obviously. I've been
Right.
in nonprofit work myself in the past in my career. I've worn a lot of different hats myself as well. But to actually say, let's create something that we want to see within our community, I think is also quintessential Midland,
Yeah.
right?
No, I think that's right. I mean, I think you can look around at like the some recent examples: Midland Athletics Syndicate,
Hmm.
the Summit Center, Ally Village, and the Ally Gun Store. I mean, those are Midlanders that just decided, this is something I'm going to do. Bush Tennis Center
Hmm.
and Jim Henry's, vision for making tennis big in Midland, which, I mean, I helped coach the Midland Classical tennis team that used to have about 10 or 12 kids,
What
and
do
we,
you not do? Seriously. I
uh,
mean, like, once a jock, always a jock. I get that myself. But, like, I guess baseball and tennis have some sort of, like,
my wife was a
correlation.
tennis player, so that's how
Oh,
we.
cool.
And honestly, if I coach baseball, I'm too
I
intense,
get that.
and so I coach a sport. I coach a sport that I didn't do because I'm not as intense.
And you're coachable, so you're probably like, "You know what? I'll give it a
Yeah.
shot."
But we
That's so
had,
cool.
to give credit back to Bush. I mean, we had about a dozen kids that used to play tennis, and we now have over 60.
It's amazing. And now there's a
And
pickleball night,
yeah,
and you can be a member and you can take tennis lessons. I
right,
know that there's a lot of college events that happen there as well.
there are.
So, going back to the zoo, your team has this discussion and they said, "Okay, well, like, we would really like to do something and do it together. And instead of just donating funds, let's create something."
Yeah.
So, after that initial conversation, I bet you guys were all like, okay, this seems like what's the phrase they say in sales all the time? How do you eat a Cadillac one bite at a
Yeah,
time?
right,
So,
right.
what was that next step that you guys took?
So the next step was we purchased Green Acres
Okay.
miniature golf course, which was, that's a great idea to do the zoo, but let's do something that's a little more doable. In other words, smaller staff, don't have to keep golf balls and putters alive.
Right.
I mean, it's a simpler. It was not a simple project to do, but it
Hmm.
was once it's up and running, it's easier. So we purchased that in, I think it was late 18,
Hmm.
opened that in 21.
Okay, so let's make sure I'm understanding. So your team said, okay, we like the idea of the zoo, but let's do something more tangible. So you guys created. I know that Green Acres was something previously that Midland had, and then you guys revamped it. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's right. It was built in 1955
Wow,
originally.
1955. Because
Yeah.
my husband, being a native Midlander too, he went to Midland High. He used to say he was a huge golfer at Midland High School on the golf team, and he was saying that Green Acres, when y'all revamped it, I didn't realize it was the same group behind Green Acres that is going to be behind
Yeah, I
Zoo
mean
Midland.
it's a more expanded group for sure, but I spearheaded the Green Acres
Wow.
project and the rebuild of Green Acres and getting it up and going along with several of my partners at Crown Quest. And so that same, I'll call it a core group, that same core group is helping get the zoo going as well. The gigantic difference between Green Acres and the zoo, several things. The zoo's a nonprofit, and we are raising outside funds, and it's not just our group. So it's a community project. It's not just a passion project for some people. So Green Acres got us up and going, and we said, "Man, this is great." We saw a lot of response from the community, positive response from the community for that, and the idea of the zoo never really died during that time. It was just, well, let's do this and let's get this going, and then we'll figure it out from there. And during that time, we reached out to some experts as in the zoo and amusement type world and said, okay, here's our idea. Help us put some flesh to it. Like, is this a terrible idea? Is this doable? What kind of demography do we need? What type of site do we need? I mean, so many questions. Help us with that. And so we reached out to a group called Canopy. That's what they do. They basically help. I mean, I don't know if all is the correct answer, but
Mhm.
most all aquariums, zoos, and amusement groups with demographic information, ticket pricing,
Case studies.
case study, is it viable, is it not? And so they put together kind of an initial report. They introduced us to some architects that are specialize in zoos,
Wow.
which there's a couple of those groups in the country. And so we started talking with those architects and just formulating, okay, you have this idea of a zoo.
Mhm.
Now, what can we reasonably do?
Okay, so I'm going to stop you right here. A lot of the people that we've been talking to, the way that they got started with, any organization that they're currently with is they literally started boots to the ground. In my head, I'm just imagining you on your laptop, like probably towards the end of the day, Googling, you know, what's the first step to create a zoo? Because truly, you have to start somewhere.
That's right.
I was just going to ask, how did you even get into contact with Canopy? Because the company that you said does all the case studies and the marketing and helps you understand if it's a viable project or not. If I were you, I would just be like, okay, well, how do I don't know, I'd Google and be like, okay, how do I start a zoo? Or like, who are the right people to help me find zoo employees? Because you got to start somewhere.
Right.
I'm a big believer in doing research before, but I'm not really into the complicated research. I just
Right.
straight to the point. So how did you even get started with Canopy? Like, is it something that you just Googled, or did you guys leverage your connections within your company?
No, it was, so we definitely used some folks within the company to do some of that initial research. And we've got some great people that can help with that. And it's not all me by any means stretch of the imagination. It's not just me. So yeah, it essentially was, digging into, okay, who are the people that do this stuff? And who can we talk to, and having some initial conversations with folks to be like, hey, this is our idea, what do you tell us what you think. And so just through process of kind of what you said, Googling and making some phone calls and making some connections that we didn't have any
Right.
connections with anybody in that world when we started. And so you have some initial Zoom calls. I think it was 2020 when we started
Mhm.
having the conversation. So you're Zoom calling, and the initial conversation with the guy that helped us through everything, Zach was his name. He's like, so what do you want to do? And we're like, well, we have this idea. We've got a great community. It's a growing community,
Mhm.
very young. Biggest demographic 0 to 4,
Mhm.
average age is 32.
Did you know how many births? We were talking to Steve Bowerman.
Yeah.
Do you know how many births took place in August of 24 and August, also September of 24?
It was,
250 a month. That's
yeah,
500 children in the span of 60 days.
yeah,
Isn't
yeah.
that crazy?
I was board president for a little while at Midland Memorial and was on the board for a
That's
while,
so cool.
and it felt like the last couple years, like every month, it was a new record on
Yes.
births, and
I'm
so
just
it's unbelievable.
I'm just thinking, as a parent myself, I have a 6 and a 3-year-old. And I'm thinking, that is so many children.
Yeah, it's great.
It's
It's a
amazing.
growing community. I was talking to a doctor the other day that was that they're recruiting to try to come to Midland, and he's up in a suburb of Chicago
Oh,
is where
wow.
he lives, and he's thinking about coming down here. And one of the comments he made is he's like, I haven't seen construction in the last 5 or 6 years where I am, and everybody is old. He's like, I come to Midland and there's everything. He said there's, road construction, everything's being built. And
Mhm.
he's like, this is way different
It's
than
actually
what I've
pretty
seen.
exciting. I know
It
that it's
is.
inconvenient to have construction, but growing up in a big city like I've only known construction. So, but it's exciting because it shows that the community is willing to invest back into
Yeah.
making it better for us. So on that note, you said you're working with a guy named Zach at Canopy. How did you guys determine what animals would be suitable for the zoo? I mean, I can only imagine in my head, again, I'm oversimplifying things, but in my head, I would think, okay, can giraffes live comfortably in West Texas? Because it is a desert.
Sure.
So I can imagine the arid climate that we have would be beneficial for a lot of desert type animals.
Yeah, I
Is that
mean,
the
if
case?
you think of the savanna in Africa, it's a
Mm-hmm.
very similar climate. Not exactly the
Yeah.
same, but very similar. There's certain animals, obviously, that don't make sense. Polar bears don't make sense. But there's a ton of animals. I mean, you can kind of go across the United States and think of similar climates to Midland.
Mm-hmm.
Phoenix being
Yeah.
even harsher, I would say. It gets hotter in Phoenix than it does here, to Fort Worth, to San Antonio, Houston. All of them have zoos, and
They
so our
do.
species will be a similar species mix that they have. And and priority one is making sure that we're not trying to put a square peg in a round hole, meaning we're not going to try to make a polar bear live in Midland, Texas, as an extreme example. And so just being mindful of what that is, and that's part of what those experts helped us with. I mean, we had the initial study, and then we hired a former zoo director, to then help us further and like, okay, you know how to run operations, and we hired her as a consultant, just like help us walk through like, if you were putting a zoo in this climate, what would you do? And then bringing in the architects who, they do renovations kind of throughout the country on zoos, which the interesting thing about a zoo is, there's a like two and a half architectural groups that do a lot of work on zoos, but all of
Wow.
that work is adding on or tearing down an old display and building a new display. It's not
Ground up.
building one from scratch.
Wow.
And so the last zoo built from scratch was Animal Kingdom, done by Disney, in Florida.
Really?
So it's been 25, 26 years since somebody has built a zoo from the
That's
ground up.
crazy. Okay, so I'm just trying to think because I've been to Animal Kingdom and I went to the Millennium celebration that took
Okay.
place, and it was right before they opened that up. And I remember all of the different exhibits that they were building, and I remember reading as like a little kid, all that went into it. Because I know Disney, one of the things that Disney does very well is making sure that the animals that they house within Disney are actually comfortable, which sounds like you guys have the same goal. So it sounds like there's a lot of alignment in regards to the goals that you guys are trying to achieve. So have you ever been, just trying to pick your brain a little bit, have you ever been to the Nashville Zoo before?
I have not even been to Nashville before,
Okay,
so no.
good trip. Um, it's gotten a little bit, I'm from Austin, and
Okay.
Austin has turned into a tourist trap, in my
Right.
opinion. It's a little bit like that, so just go into it knowing that. But the Nashville Zoo, I think, is probably one of the only zoos. Going to zoos was one of my favorite things growing up in Houston.
Yeah.
The first
It's
8
a good
years of my
one.
life, I grew up in Houston, and then we moved to Austin. So you would get the museum pass, right? You
Hmm.
would go to the science museum and
Right.
the zoo and all the things, and it wouldn't have to be additional fees for you to go, right? Well, one of the things that I really love about the Nashville Zoo is that it's more of like an open concept in regards to how the animals roam, right? It's much
Sure.
like what the Animal Kingdom in Disney has,
Yeah.
which is, you know, much like what you would see in the Serengeti. You see, a giraffe roaming with the wildebeest. It's not
Right.
segmented, I guess you would say areas for certain animals. But the reason why they did that was to basically create better systems for the animals. Are y'all planning on doing something similar, or what is the plan? I'm sure there's different ways to skin a cat, right?
Right.
But maybe the wrong analogy at this point.
Yeah.
Sorry about that. But I meant there's
Know what you
different
mean.
there's different ways. There's different ways to do things,
Right.
and I'm just curious, how is the zoo going to be structured? Is it too early to talk about? Our goal is to obviously revisit the project as it goes on to help you guys explain your project. But do you have any preliminary ideas of what the exhibits are going to look
Oh
like?
yeah. Yeah. So we're now 2.5 years of working with
Wow.
architects. And so we have our plans. You know, we're kind of doing them in phases. You're building 52 separate buildings,
Wow.
and the associated habitat that goes with them. So it takes a while to plan all that. And we've got over 20 professionals that are drawing on paper to help us, and we have 3 meetings a week with all of them via, thank goodness for Zoom and Teams, because they're all over the country. And so we are, and we have two full-time people here in Midland that are working on it as well. Jason Green, who's our
Hmm.
zoo director, and then Chuck Harrington, who
Hmm.
is he worked for the city. He was retiring, and
Hmm.
I came and showed him the project and said, "Can you help us through the permitting?" And
Yeah, wasn't he the city planner?
he was.
Okay, I actually have had conversations with him about my own business, and he was so helpful because he has an idea about what works within our community, what insight he can provide to help anyone really. It doesn't really matter who you are, he wants to help.
Yeah, that's right.
And it really sounds like you have a great team on your side to be able to make something so unique because this is such a huge endeavor,
Yeah.
right? I can't imagine how do you even like acquire, I don't know if that's even the right word, a giraffe or a hippo or
Yeah, there's different ways. So that's where Jason comes in, and need to probably talk about how we met him. So we went on a best practices tour, and I think it was 21 in Florida, bunch of zoos in Florida, wildlife parks, and so kind of went to see multiple different ways of doing a zoo with our architects and with that contract zoo director that I mentioned earlier. And the point of that was to have our architects show us different things and to get our reaction and our response as, what direction are we going to take this zoo? And as you were saying earlier, where Animal Kingdom kind of blurs those
Mhm.
lines and it feels like they're out in the middle of the
Yeah,
Serengeti. Um, it just takes forethought to do those kind of things. I
yeah.
mean, obviously, the easy thing to do is just put a chain link fence up and call it good. And that's not we want the blurred line style where, one of the things that I didn't know until we did this is they have at Animal Kingdom in the safari deal that you go through, the animals are together, but they're actually separated. And the way they've separated them is there's grass that they've put out there that will deter the animals from crossing. And it's a metal grass that the animals won't, certain species won't cross that.
That's amazing.
And
So
so
like
you
cattle
can't tell.
guards,
Yeah, kind of
like cattle
similar. Yeah.
guards, but like incognito.
Right.
That's
And so it
fascinating.
just takes some forethought. And that's the benefit that we have of building new as compared to, trying to a 1930, 40, 50 facility that was built in that style where, a lot of concrete and those type of things. It's really expensive to take some of
Hmm.
those things out. And we have the benefit of we're starting from scratch. So how can let's take best practices. And one of the things we told our architects is we want your greatest hits. What are the coolest displays? Because they've done individual things, they've
Mm.
done portions of zoos. Like, what are the coolest, most popular and best things, with the idea of interaction being the number one thing? Like, how can you have an interaction, either direct or indirect, with that animal, and think about it from a kid perspective. So, a lot of zoos, again, not it's just the way they did them. The fences are certain heights and the fences are solid. And a kid, you have to pick the kid up, and
Yeah.
especially if you're summer in Houston,
Oh
picking a
my
kid up,
gosh, so hot.
is like picking up a charcoal, hot piece of charcoal. It's just hot.
Yes.
Everybody's
And
miserable.
sweaty,
Yeah.
and kids just naturally have jam hands. They're just sticky, and
Right.
you're like, "Oh my gosh." I totally understand.
So
So
so with our habitats, we're trying to look at it from what will a kid see? What somebody that can walk or even in a stroller, like what is it that they can see, and what opportunities and surprises can we have for them
mhm.
that they can see from their angle rather than just an adult. So it's not a kid zoo per
Yeah.
se, but certainly a kid perspective, and that we're doing a bunch of things that are a little different. We're going to have different playgrounds kind of as you move around, because a kid can only look at so many animals before they need to go run around
Get the
and
sillies
and
out.
yeah, get the sillies out. And so, one of those things that we can do to blur those lines is, well, what kind of apparatus or playground can we put next to the spider monkey enclosure that the spider monkeys may have in theirs that we can have here, and they can have an indirect interaction where they see
Yes.
them doing this here, and, well, maybe I can do that over
That
here.
is
And
so
so
cool.
just trying to be creative with a kid in mind, and an adult for that matter. I mean, we'll have opportunities. You can do a rhino touch, which is a
That is so
super
cool.
cool. And one of the things that's fun about that, and it's not a big thing, but most zoos have a perspective of a rhino from kind of above. So you'll be
Yeah,
the sidewalk would be at like its back height.
right.
And so you're kind of looking down and it's like, oh, that's cool. That's a
That's how the
rhino.
Fort Worth Zoo is
Right.
because of the way that they have to kind of like,
I mean,
again,
part of that is to help with the enclosure because,
exactly.
it's a big animal.
But you were just saying,
Um,
like, initially how zoos were developed was you're kind of like, making it work with whatever you've
right,
inherited. So you're able to start from scratch so that you can think about, okay, how can we actually make this encounter more
right.
meaningful?
And as an example for a rhino, like you can have a mixed species display. So you can put some hoof stock in with a rhino. And what you do is a rhino is large. I mean, it's a 4,000 pound animal that's the size of a small school bus. And so you can have telephone poles as an example
Hmm.
that are this tall, that are 3 or 4 feet apart, and that rhino can't walk through that, but the hoof stock can. And so you can have a mixed display where if the rhino's cranky that day, the hoof stock can just be like, well, we're going to go over here because he's not happy.
Yeah.
And so we'll have a typical view where you'll be kind of from above, but we're also going to have a view where you get down beside that rhino and you have the opportunity to touch it, and you don't realize how big it is until you're next to it,
Yeah.
and you put your hands on it and you're like, oh, this is like a dinosaur. Like this is
Yes.
incredible. And so things like that kind of throughout. Giraffe, we were talking about that before we started. We will have giraffe, and we will have a giraffe feeding.
I had asked, how do you transport a giraffe? Because in my head, I'm thinking that must be very complicated. I mean, do you have them stand up or do you have them like lay them down? I know I've seen a couple videos of when I'm having a really bad day, I go on YouTube and you can see how they x-ray animals and
Okay,
sometimes they put them in these like funny little devices. If you're
sure.
having a bad day, you should try and do that. But I know for dolphins, they put towels over, like wet
Right.
towels over the dolphins to transport them. So it just got me thinking, how do you transport a giraffe? Because you said
Yeah.
you were going to have giraffes.
Well, Jason Green, who's our zoo
Hmm.
director, is the expert on all things
Hmm.
transportation. He's one of the handful of guys in the United States that actually, in the southeastern portion of the United States, if a zoo wants an animal moved, he's probably getting a phone call. And so I've gotten pictures from him at times where he's moving elephants, he's moving hippos, he's moving rhinos.
I would
But
love to see his camera roll on his phone
oh,
because I can't
it's
imagine.
interesting for sure. But the to answer your question, I mean, what he would say, and I've heard him tell others, is you've driven past animals that are being transported on I-20.
No
100%
way.
chance. Yeah, you just don't know.
That
And
is
so
so
to answer the
cool.
question on a giraffe, they you know what a cattle trailer looks
Yeah.
like. So they have these modified cattle trailers where they'll drop the bottom, the middle of between the
Hmm.
wheels will be dropped down a little bit lower, and then it'll be, I think they get it, I don't remember exactly, it's 10 or 11 feet. A giraffe can, they're going to be somewhere between 10 to 14 feet tall. And so obviously they maybe have to stoop a little bit to be in there, but frequent stops, you watch your speed, a lot of water, and just taking it easy. And part of a giraffe, I mean, one of the complications of a giraffe is transportation. I mean, that is something that you have to take into account. And so you know the the acquisition of animals and the trading of animals is very common within the zoo industry, because a zoo will be, hey, we're going to renovate our whatever and rebuild this habitat, and we have these animals. um, you know you pay to transport them, you feed them and take care of them, and then in 3 years when we're done, we can have them back. And so we're building our zoo with general species in mind, but not painting ourselves into any corners where, because we're a new zoo,
Hmm.
we're not going to be able to just go out and say this is exactly what we want and get exactly what we want. And I don't think that that's what we need anyway, because having a variety of species is actually exciting for different folks. But understanding again what can live here and what is safe, and what can you have some form of interaction with? One of the things that people always ask, well, a couple things is like, what animals are you going to have? And then they start listing them before you can answer. They're like, elephants, lions, gorillas, or like those are some of the first ones people say. And I'm like, yeah, none of those. And they're like, well,
Wow.
what are you going to have? And it's like, well, there's a lot of other animals besides those. And
Believe it or not.
as an example of those, like lions are super cool if you've never seen one, but a lion sleeps almost
Yeah,
all day. I mean, it's just like your house cat, right? It just
exactly.
sleeps and it's if you've never seen one, it's cool to see, but it's cool to see for a minute or two and like, I mean, it's just sleeping. And so what other species can we have? A jaguar is one that we've talked about. Can we do a jaguar because they like to swim and they're a little bit more active
Yes.
than just a lion. Texas Parks and Wildlife is working on a reintroduction program of the ocelot, and it was native to West Texas. And so, can we work with them on housing some of those animals as they, grow that? And can we be a part of that program in some way? So, creating those habitats for feline species and canine species and bird and hoof stock. And so having a general, like I said earlier, giraffe is certainly one of those. Rhinos is certainly one of those that we feel very confident we can get. And then there's some other ones that, we ought to be able to do this. I know for sure we're going to have lorikeets. We actually already have the lorikeets
What is a
here in Midland.
lorikeet?
Yeah, lorikeets are awesome. So a lorikeet is bigger than a parakeet, but smaller than a parrot. And so it looks like a kind of a
That's
miniature,
so so
a
specific.
minute. It looks like kind of a miniature parrot, and it eats fruit and nectar. And
Cool.
so what you do with the lorikeet, the interact, so you'll have an aviary that will have about 60 to 80 of these lorikeets in it. And about half those lorikeets will be hand raised, meaning that they're very tame, and the other half will not be. And so the reason you don't hand train all of them is so when you're in having a feeding experience where you can feed them, you've got some flying around and you just don't get bombarded with all of them.
Right.
And so you'll hold a little cup of nectar, and these birds will land on you, and their tongue looks like a pipe cleaner. And so it's this round, bristled tongue that they land, and they stick their tongue in, and they eat the nectar out of
J-
your hand.
Jeff, I feel like you're a walking zoo book. I used to love those books. You remember getting them in the
Oh yeah,
90s and like
yeah,
read them? That is so cool. Wow. Like, okay, so going off the topic of what parents can expect. So feeding opportunities, you said with giraffes and you said
and
lorikeet.
lorikeets, yeah,
That sounds like so much fun. I think there's something similar at Fort Worth, but not with that
yeah.
particular animal. But I know that the butterfly garden and Moody
Hmm.
Gardens is one of them. I know you can do like a penguin experience
Right.
there, where you can feed them little fish. That sounds so cool. So, what other things can parents expect in regards to attractions that the zoo is going to help
Yeah.
host?
So we'll have. I mean, we're doing everything in the mind of stroller movement and how can strollers move and making sidewalks a little bit
Every
wider.
mother right now is like applauding you because it
And
is so hard with a bob, like the double
right.
stroller, to get through doors.
Yeah.
I mean, we have such a hard time getting it through our house. Like, thank you so much
Yeah.
for doing that.
And it'll be and where a stroller can go, also a wheelchair can go.
ADA compliant.
And so ADA compliance, we're going to be. I think there's really just one little portion of one area that wouldn't be ADA accessible, but everything else, the intention is for it to be similar to what Green Acres. We had our ADA compliance guy come out and whenever we were finishing that project, and he was like, "This was built in 1955," and we're like, "Yeah, we added a whole lot of sidewalks in order to try to get all these holes to where you can access them with a wheelchair and with a stroller." And having the miniature golf course built in 55, sidewalks were a lot smaller, all stairs, all those things. So certainly something that we care a lot about at the zoo as well. Having those playgrounds, like we mentioned earlier, and then we'll have an area like a birthday pavilion that you can have your birthday parties at for
Fun.
those kids. We'll also have an event pavilion where if, somebody wants to have a corporate event or a wedding
At San
even.
Antonio Zoo, there's lots of weddings that occur.
Yeah.
Like I've been to one and it was during Fiesta weekend, which if you know anything about San Antonio, Fiesta weekend, the whole thing shuts down. It's like it's almost like Mardi Gras is to New Orleans and Louisiana. That is the most fun thing ever because you can basically rent out the whole zoo and the whole, your whole friends and family can spend time with the animals in different
Yeah.
ways. That's amazing.
Yeah, and our event center will be it'll the back of it will be over the savannah, and so Giraffe and all of those will be right there.
Can you imagine during
Um,
your best man speech to see a giraffe?
hanging out. So, it's very family oriented, and really that whole development, the preserve guys are building there to our north, which were two separate projects. Some people
Mhm.
view those as the same. They're not the
Yeah,
same.
let's
It's
talk about
two.
that a little bit. Cunus, right?
Yeah,
He is in charge of Daliah development
that's right.
and his group, it's my understanding, is developing this shopping area. Can you explain
Yeah,
the
it's a
differences?
it's a it's a mixed use. So they'll have some small business type offices. They'll have some food and bev opportunities, some restaurants, and then some shopping and retail. So it'll be a mixed use, and it's the whole footprint of the area is 200 acres.
Wow.
They're developing about 56, 55 acres. The zoo has 52 acres. So we're developing half
Mhm.
of the footprint, if you will, and then the remaining half will be green space.
Wow.
It'll be walking trails. There will be a large pond.
Okay, so that's been
Um,
a big point of contention on the internet with the internet trolls. I'd be remiss if we don't mention it. People have been begging for water space to fish.
yeah,
And if you know anything about Midland, there's a couple ponds where you can fish. One of them is by, I think, Stonegate's campus. I
right.
think there's one there. But this will also have a water space area.
Yeah, so that's under the Dahlia side of things. It'll be right outside our front gate, but it's on their side of it. But yeah, that my understanding is they want to have a fishing
That'd be
opportunity for
nice.
people and a nice constant level lake there for and you can go out there now and those lakes are there and
Wow.
it's water runoff from the surrounding community that goes there. It used to be a playa. I mean, I guess it still is a playa, but the playa system is a big part of the water network in West Texas. And so that's a big reason why you leave green space there is because water is going, when it rains, it pours around here and you've
Floods.
got to be able to take that water and hold that water. And so they've got a very creative solution on, allowing the runoff to run off, but then capturing as much as possible to put in the lake. And at the zoo, we're doing a whole bunch of water capture as well. And we're going to tell the story on how, water is such a precious resource out here in the desert. How we can best use those things and some best practices. We've got right now, we actually broke ground. Well, I guess we broke ground a while back, but we've got two greenhouses already built, and we're building our offsite facility. They broke ground on it just the other day, and that's actually where and we are going to grow all of our own uh, lettuce. Believe it or not, a zoo will use somewhere between $30,000 and $40,000 a year of lettuce, and so we built some greenhouses,
That's
and we're
wild.
doing an aeroponics program where you'll use very minimal water. And you can grow
Wow.
way more lettuce than we need for the zoo. So we've got that up
Way
and
more than
running.
you need, you mean, right?
Yeah, way more than
Okay.
we'll have leftover,
Wow.
and we'll use that much, and then we'll find different opportunities within the community to give some of our
That's
natural organic lettuce to others.
great branding opportunity right there.
Right.
Well, our plan is to be able to kind of track your progress over the next couple of months and like check in with you. But, I wanted to wrap us up with this last question of what is something that gives you hope for just Midland? What is it your project? Is it something that you're learning through this role as zoo president? What gives you hope for the future of our community?
You know, Midland is a community that knows how to work, and I would say It's got a rich history and people that work hard. And in the last, I'll call it 10 years, maybe it's a little longer than that. The natural resources and the money that has been made because of the natural resources and those individuals that have worked their whole lives out here. There's you've had these boom and bust periods, and you've had now kind of a sustained, I mean, it's been up and down, but it's been sustained where there's enough extra dollars to be able to think about, okay, well, what can I do to make this place better than before I got here? And it's exciting to see. I mean, certainly we're just one project of many that are all very similar in makeup. We mentioned them earlier, but you've got these different projects where people said, yeah, I've never built a shopping center, but I want to build a cool shopping center because I don't need to go to Dallas to see this shopping center. And let's be creative with the space that we have, and let's do
100%.
some fun things. So I'm excited that there's a bunch of people that are doing that, and there's this we're utilizing the ability we have, which I'd say the strength of Midland is the want to work and the want to improve. I mean, we're improving the world through producing the energy that we do. So what can we do locally to have some extra things where, you name all these different projects and you see all these different things, and even the city doing Beal Park and this soccer facility and having tournaments stay here, and Midland Athletic Syndicate having volleyball and basketball tournaments here. Like, you can really start to draw out where when I was in high school, I would have laughed. And I think a lot of people maybe would have chuckled that, like, I mean, this could become a destination of sorts where,
I know John
y- y-
Scarborough, sorry, Scarborough. I always have a hard time saying that. Sorry, Mr. John. He says that too. It's to raise our own and to be able to really provide more opportunities for people to just see how wonderful our community is.
yeah. And I've got, one last thing I'll say, I've got three boys that are a senior down to a seventh grader. And one of the things that gives me hope and really excites me is, we've traveled to all the different places, seen a bunch of different big cities and things like that. And my boys, and I don't think my boys are the only ones that are saying this, but my boys go somewhere else and they're like, man, I love Midland, because they'll see whatever it is that's somewhere else that they're like, I mean, this is nice, but I just like visiting here. I like living in Midland.
100%.
And so to have that younger, the future generations, having more of them say, no, I want to live in Midland, is very, very encouraging and very, very exciting. And hopefully through all these projects and all these things we can do, it can continue to grow and be the thriving community that it will be.
How can people track y'all's progress with how the zoo is developed over the next couple of months?
Yeah, so Instagram, Facebook, Zoo Midland, and then our website, zoomidland.org.
Great.
We've got on our, probably the best way is go to our website, and down at the bottom you can sign up to get email updates.
Oh, fun.
And we send out various updates, but really our Facebook and Instagram is certainly the most day to day updated.
Wonderful. Well, like I said earlier, I'm looking forward to having additional conversations with you so we can ask all of the questions as they come up. But if we want to, track your progress, we'll reach out. I know we will via social media or your website. I encourage everyone else to do that as well. Thank you again, Mr. Jeff. It was a pleasure talking to you. And I feel like I could talk to you for a couple more hours just about
Well,
random things. I would love to pick your brain.
yeah.
But
Well, thank you.
yeah,
It was
anytime.
fun.
Catch you later. Bye.